What do an Oscar-winning Hollywood action star, navigating a highly scrutinized and, frankly, bitter divorce, and a 170-year-old Australian church facing an existential moral scandal have in common?
I mean, on paper, absolutely nothing.
Right. You would assume the recovery process for a global celebrity looks completely different from the recovery of a massive historic religious institution. But in practice, when you strip away the glamour of Hollywood and the stained glass of the cathedral, they are both using the exact same playbook to rebuild a shattered identity.
It is a totally counterintuitive pairing. But when you examine the mechanisms of how these two entities actually process crisis, the parallels are, well, they're undeniably striking.
Yeah.
You realize that restructuring a broken foundation requires the same fundamental engineering, whether you are dealing with a public persona or a sprawling bureaucracy.
Welcome to the Deep Dive. We are thrilled you are here with us. And today we are looking at a stack of sources that might initially seem like, I don't know, an administrative filing error on our end.
Yeah, it definitely looks like we mixed up two different folders.
Exactly. Because on one side of the table, we have a collection of recent, deeply personal interviews, biographies, and award histories detailing the life of Angelina Jolie.
Right. And sitting right next to those celebrity profiles, we have a dense, highly technical 300-page document, specifically the 2016 reports and accounts from the Anglican Diocese of Adelaide.
The mission for this deep dive is incredibly focused. For you listening, we are using these two wildly different sets of source material to explore the universal mechanics of transformation. We really want to understand how an internationally famous individual and a massive historical institution navigate profound structural crises.
How they actually enforce accountability on a functional level.
Right, and how do they completely restructure their core identities from the ground up when the entire world is watching? Okay, let's unpack this.
Let's start by examining the mechanics of personal transformation through the lens of Angelina Jolie. The sources here, specifically her recent profiles in WSJ Style and The Statesman, they provide crucial context.
Yeah, she's reflecting on the years immediately following her highly publicized divorce from Brad Pitt back in 2016.
And she admits something structurally significant for someone whose entire brand, was built on playing fearless action heroes.
Right.
She states clearly that she had lost her fighting spirit and felt entirely knocked down.
Which is, that admission alone forces a complete reevaluation of a label she has carried for her entire public life, which is this idea of being punk.
Right, exactly.
She mentions that when she was younger, being punk meant a little bit of madness. It was about outward wildness, breaking societal expectations, being loud and, out of the box.
And she actually notes that she wishes she had trusted that youthful madness more when she was a teenager.
But post-crisis, her functional definition of that word has completely flipped.
What's fascinating here is how the combination of trauma and aging fundamentally alters the mechanism of rebellion. Because when you are young, rebellion is typically outward.
Right.
It's an offensive strategy against the world.
Like pushing back against everything.
Exactly. But when you survive a profound personal crisis and you exist in a landscape that is just constantly overwhelming, the mechanics of rebellion have to shift inward.
Okay, so it transforms into an aggressive defense.
Yes. For Jolie, staying fiercely private, deliberately doing less, and rigidly protecting her peace, that has become her new form of punk resistance against a loud world.
I hear that, but I look at this through the lens of modern celebrity culture, and I have to be a little cynical.
That's fair.
Is this new definition of punk, this quiet, curated resistance, a genuine internal shift? Or are we just looking at a seasoned Oscar-winning celebrity executing a brilliant PR rebrand?
Or rebrand.
Right, because this feels a lot like when a massive corporation gets caught in a scandal and they immediately roll out a softer logo.
Oh yeah, change their font to lowercase letters.
Yes. Lowercase font, launch a massive ad campaign about listening and learning. The external marketing changes, but the internal culture remains exactly the same. So is Jolie just doing that?
That skepticism is entirely warranted whenever you analyze a public figure. But the sources point to a mechanical shift in her life that suggests this isn't just a new marketing rollout.
Okay.
We see the most compelling evidence of this internal shift in how she practically manages her children's identities, specifically regarding styling.
Oh, right. She refuses to use a regular stylist for her kids, which in the ecosystem of Hollywood red carpets is almost unheard of.
Completely unheard of.
She operates on the philosophy that clothing is a direct manifestation of identity. And she point-blank refuses to let a hired professional dictate who her children are supposed to be.
But beyond just not hiring a stylist, look at the actual experiment she ran.
This part is wild.
It is. She described taking her own highly valuable, historically curated, vintage red carpet dresses, throwing them in front of her kids, and telling them to just cut them up.
She just let them take scissors to archive dresses.
Yes. She encouraged them to physically dismantle these iconic garments to, as she says, break the box.
Wow.
Psychologically, that is not a PR move. That is a literal physical destruction of her own highly curated Hollywood identity, so her children have the raw materials to forge their own.
You know, that philosophy actually explains the underlying mechanism of her new fashion business, Atelier Jolie.
Right, how so?
Well, I initially didn't understand how a celebrity clothing line fit into this narrative of healing, but she realized that buying hyper-expensive corporate design clothing that is, quote, made to look punk is the antithesis of actual rebellion.
Oh, totally. You can't mass-produce punk.
Exactly. So she structured Atelier Jolie entirely differently. It's not a top-down hierarchy where a famous designer dictates trends to the consumer. It is engineered as a collaborative collective.
Where the consumer is the creator.
Yeah, she is structurally trying to remove the corporate hierarchy from fashion entirely.
Jolie's approach is highly personal and organic. But what happens when the entity that is broken isn't a single person, but an institution that employs hundreds of people?
Right. You can't just hand a church a pair of scissors and tell it to break the box and organically discover itself.
Exactly. When an institution shatters, rebuilding requires an incredibly rigid, structural mechanism of accountability.
Which pulls us directly into our second source, which is the 2016 Synod report from the Diocese of Adelaide. And just for context for you listening, when the report refers to the Synod, that is essentially the church's governing parliament. It's the legislative body that makes the administrative and financial decisions for the diocese.
Right. And the context surrounding this 2016 report is existentially heavy.
Very heavy.
The diocese was responding to the Australian Royal Commission into institutional responses to child sexual abuse. Specifically, they were navigating Case Study 36, which investigated the historical horrors within the Church of England Boys' Society.
So this was not a minor PR crisis.
No, this was an absolute collapse of moral authority and profound institutional trauma.
I mean, reading through this document, it's a jarring experience.
There really is.
When you are discussing trauma of this magnitude, you expect the response to be pastoral, emotional, spiritual.
But instead, the response is incredibly bureaucratic.
Very. They implemented a new professional standards ordinance in 2015, and they engineered a specific healing steps process to handle complaints and provide counseling support.
Because a bureaucracy processes trauma differently than a human being.
Right.
An individual like Angelina Jolie can retreat, set emotional boundaries, organically redefine her internal ethos. An institution cannot feel its way to recovery.
It has to engineer a machine to process the failure.
Yes. The healing steps process is exactly that. It's a mechanism. The diocese had to formally establish the Episcopal Standards Ordinance. They appointed a new professional standards director and a deputy director.
They had to create a literal step-by-step reporting structure to manage the sheer weight of past abuses.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though.
Yeah.
The report outlines the raw mathematical toll of building this machine.
Oh, right. The financial side.
The Synod openly acknowledges that just the legal and administrative costs of responding to the Royal Commission were projected to be over $200,000.
And staring at that number, I found myself stuck on a really difficult question. Like, can an institution mathematically budget for moral repair?
It feels like trying to weigh a soul on a kitchen scale.
That's exactly it. You have these incredibly strict, cold financial ledgers of the Synod sitting directly adjacent to the entirely unquantifiable catastrophic human trauma they were attempting to address.
Honestly, it is a completely flawed system.
Yeah.
There is no mathematical equation that balances a financial spreadsheet against human suffering. It is an impossible paradox.
Yeah.
And it is also the brutal reality of institutional survival.
All right, because the ledger is cold and inadequate, but without that ledger, the institution literally ceases to function.
Exactly. If the bank accounts empty out, there is no money to pay the professional standards director. There is no funding for the Healing Steps counseling program.
So the highest, most noble ideals of healing and pastoral care are entirely tethered to ground-level, merciless financial survival. You can't offer spiritual salvation if you can't pay the electricity bill at the cathedral.
Precisely. Whether you are a Hollywood star navigating a high-stakes legal separation or a historic church navigating a moral and legal crisis, healing and identity rebuilding aren't just philosophical exercises.
They're highly practical.
Deeply practical.
I
And they require immense amounts of capital to execute.
Which is crazy, but we see that mechanical reality dictate Jolie's career pivot, too.
Oh, absolutely.
Before her split, the sources outlined that she had essentially quit acting. She was focusing her energy entirely on directing. She helmed the 2014 film Unbroken, and First They Killed My Father in 2017.
Directing was her passion. It was her ideal self-actualized path.
But post-divorce, that ideal path was no longer practical.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, survival mandates the compromise of our ideal plans.
Yeah.
The sources note her net worth is estimated at $120 million.
Yeah.
But there is a massive functional difference between wealth tied up in real estate or trusts and the steady, liquid cash flow required to maintain a massive family apparatus, multiple estates, and the legal teams required for a protracted divorce.
So she practically needed cash flow.
Very much so.
And she openly admitted she returned to acting purely out of practicality. I mean, directing takes years of immersive, all-consuming focus on a single project, often requiring living on location.
She just couldn't do that anymore.
Right. She needed steady income, and crucially, she needed to stay close to home. She engineered her career around her immediate constraints, only accepting short acting jobs where she could bring her kids along.
And we see this exact same functional compromise in the Diocese of Adelaide's 2016 report. To fund their spiritual mission and their moral recovery, they had to aggressively manage their assets.
Oh, the financial details in the Synod report read more like a prospectus for a commercial real estate developer than a church.
It really does.
We have the parish of Unley actually going under administration due to unmanageable debt.
Yep.
Then you have the parish of St. Mary's taking out a massive $600,000 commercial loan from Anglican Funds South Australia just to buy a rectory.
And to pay the interest on that debt, they are relying on commercial lease income.
It's wild to think about a spiritual entity stressing over zoning permits and interest rates. But they even created a specific strategic property officer position to figure out how to commercially develop properties like Bishop's Court.
They had to become property developers and debt managers because you cannot build a spiritual mission on top of bankrupt infrastructure.
Right.
And they're operating on shockingly tight margins to pull this off. The report explicitly mentions that the base stipend, the functional salary for their local clergy, was set at just $51,454 for the year 2016.
I mean, it's like trying to install magnificent, breathtaking stained glass windows in a cathedral while the actual foundation of the building is literally sinking into the mud.
You have to stabilize the dirt before you can even begin to worry about the light.
Wow, yeah. For Jolie, stabilizing the dirt meant sacrificing her directing dreams to take acting jobs for immediate cash flow.
And for the diocese, it meant paying clergy a $51,000 salary while simultaneously taking out $600,000 real estate loans.
But once that foundation is finally stabilized, once the immediate threat of collapse is mitigated, the entity faces a new challenge.
What's next?
Both the individual and the institution must figure out how to project their newly forged post-crisis identity outward into the world. You can't just survive forever. Eventually, you have to contribute.
And we are watching that outward projection happen right now in Jolie's career. It's an incredible return to artistic form.
Oh, completely. She took on the daunting role of opera singer Maria Callas in the 2024 film Maria. The sources highlight how terrified she was. She literally cried during her singing lessons.
But pushing through that resulted in an 8-minute standing ovation at the Venice Film Festival and a Golden Globe nomination.
And she is also starring in the upcoming film Couture, playing Maxine, a low-budget horror director dealing with a breast cancer diagnosis, which they shot right inside Chanel's legendary Paris showroom.
The premise of Couture isn't just an acting role, though. It ties directly into the mechanics of her real-world advocacy.
Yeah, you cannot fully analyze Angelina Jolie's public transformation without looking at her medical disclosures.
Right. In 2013 and 2015, she wrote these highly public, intensely vulnerable op-eds for the New York Times.
She revealed to the world that she carried the BRCA1 gene,
giving her an 87% risk of breast cancer and a 50% risk of ovarian cancer.
which is terrifying. And she documented her choice to undergo a preventative double mastectomy and later the removal of her ovaries and fallopian tubes.
She had no obligation to share that medical trauma.
None at all. But she engineered that disclosure specifically to force a global conversation so other women would know their medical options.
And that public service earned her the Jean Hersholt Humanitarian Oscar in 2014. And her continued outward focus recently won her a Tony for producing The Outsiders.
Now, apply that same lens of outward projection to the diocese. How does an institution project goodness after a catastrophic moral failure?
This raises an important question. The 2016 report highlights the creation of the Church and Society Ministry Unit, or SISTSU.
Okay.
They are actively organizing Anglicare Sunday. Their Anglican refugee network is funding and providing homemaker kits to newly arrived vulnerable refugees.
Oh, wow.
They are even projecting globally, utilizing their constrained funds to establish a primary healthcare clinic in their companion diocese of Bor in South Sudan.
So, what does this all mean for you listening? I look at this profound public humanitarianism, whether it's Angelina Jolie writing a deeply personal medical op-ed that changes global health conversations, or the Adelaide Diocese dedicating their scarce, heavily leveraged funds to build a clinic in South Sudan while struggling to pay their own clergy.
It's a huge contrast.
Is that purely a selfless act for the benefit of others, or is it a necessary psychological mechanism for themselves? Do they desperately need to execute these acts of service to prove to their own internal foundation that they are still fundamentally a force for good in the world?
I think it has to be both. The act of contributing to others is the functional mechanism through which you rebuild your own internal credibility.
Interesting.
You have to actively demonstrate to yourself that the core of your identity survived the trauma.
When you pull all these threads together, this bizarre pairing of Angelina Jolie and the Adelaide Diocese reveals a truly universal mechanic. Identity is never a static blueprint.
No, never.
It is a constant, messy, ongoing negotiation. You have to structurally process your past trauma, you have to ruthlessly manage the harsh financial practicalities of your present, and you have to constantly engineer pathways to reach your future ideals.
It is the exact same negotiation we all have to make, whether you are managing a team of Hollywood publicists, a synod of bishops, or just your own personal bank accounts.
Which brings this deep dive right back to you. Where are you in this cycle right now? Are you currently in a phase of youthful punk madness, tearing down structures and breaking societal rules?
Or have you survived a crisis and transitioned into a phase of quiet resistance, aggressively protecting your internal boundaries from a loud world?
Are you in the trenches right now, managing your own institutional debts and just trying to keep your foundation from sinking into the mud?
Or have you finally stabilized enough that you are ready to project your values outward and contribute to others?
As you evaluate where you are in that cycle, we want to leave you with a final thought to mull over.
Yeah, we spend so much time discussing the public metrics of recovery. In the sources, Jolie talks about her children, who are mostly around 18 years old now. She notes that they're the ones pushing her to travel, to act, and to fully engage with life again. But the most striking observation she makes is simply this. She says the fact that her kids still like her says a lot.
Wow. Think about the weight of that.
We spend our lives measuring our success and our recoveries by these massive public accolades.
We want the Tony Award, we want the Oscar.
Exactly. Or we want the perfectly balanced, audit-approved institutional ledger to prove we are fixed. But what if the truest, ultimate measure of a successful transformation isn't public at all?
What if the ultimate metric of recovery is simply whether the people who stood closest to your biggest mess still want to be in the room with you when the dust finally settles? I love that framing. When the cathedral foundation stops sinking and the trauma has finally been processed, do the people you love still want to stand next to you in the light of that stained glass window?
That is something worth thinking about.
Thank you for taking this deep dive with us today. We'll see you next time.